This is Outside Source on BBC News for viewers in the UK and around the world. We are covering all the very latest coronavirus developments here in Britain and also globally. Our main headlines: France is emerging from its lockdown on Monday, although the capital, Paris, will still face heavy restrictions. More than 33 million people have now filed for unemployment in the US. That means 1 in 5 workers have lost their jobs since the world's biggest economy ground to a halt 7 weeks ago. Seismic shocks in the UK economy as well. The Bank of England warns the UK is heading for its worst economic downturn in history. Black people in the UK are twice as likely to die from COVID-19 than white people. We'll look at why. And these are live images coming in from Downing Street, where, as you can see, the Prime Minister is among thousands saying thanks to frontline workers battling COVID-19 with the weekly clap for carers. A warm welcome to the programme. Across Europe, some countries are beginning to take tentative steps out of lockdown. France will start reopening from Monday, gradually bringing 2 months of confinement to an end. The French government has issued this map, and this is based on the spread of the virus and hospital admissions, which has helped inform its strategy. The country has been, as you can see, divided into red and into green zones. The capital, Paris, and its surrounding areas, where infection rates are still too high, are being classified as a red zone, and strict conditions will continue to apply there. The French Prime Minister called it a progressive unwinding of the lockdown.
In light of the data from our health services gathered over the last few days, the gradual lifting of the lockdown can commence from next Monday, the 11th of May. It's a new stage in the fight against the epidemic. It's good news for France and the French people. From Monday, we will introduce a highly progressive process, lasting for several weeks at least, which will allow the country to exit smoothly and with certainty from the lockdown, which we have experienced along with a large part of the world since March the 17th.
Well, the Paris Metro is preparing for commuters to start using the service once again. Workers have been busy putting up stickers in order to explain how people should be socially distancing. And what do people think there? Well, Hugh Schofield is in central France.
We already have 5 million passengers using the metro. I think we must really tell Parisians to be very careful, because there's going to be, I think, a lot of people.
What can I say? It will be a bit difficult because public transport in Paris is often overcrowded and people have to go to work, so they have to be here.
Listen, I don't know, honestly. I think it'll pose problems for those people who have to work, but for me it's a one-off.
What we've seen today is a final map, which is, the map is itself a kind of compendium of 3 different maps which look at different criteria about how the virus is spreading and about the capacity of hospitals to cope and about the capacity to test. It's a result of those 3 criteria that the government has drawn up a definitive map of red and green zones. The orange zone has disappeared now. And the red zone is all of the northeast of France, including the Ile-de-France area around Paris, but also going up to the Belgian border and going east towards the German border. That remains red. And the particular area to watch, I think, is Ile-de-France, is at the Paris area, because that is an area where the number of cases is going down, there is still a lot of pressure. And because it is the capital city, of course, all eyes are going to be on the new movement of people and the new rules that come into force on Monday, and amid fears that things could take off again in Paris. The rest of the country is green. The difference between green and red is actually pretty marginal. Basically, all the country is going to go through this process of deconfinement on Monday. The difference being that in the red zones, including Paris, some schools will not open. There's a question mark in the red zones where the middle school.
Hugh Schofield there. Lots more on what is happening in Paris and across the whole world on our website. Do check out the BBC News website. Here in the UK, plans are also being drawn up to begin relaxing the coronavirus lockdown in England. Today we heard from the Foreign Minister Dominic Raab that the total coronavirus death toll in the UK in all settings has risen to 30,615. This is after a further 539 people died, having tested positive. Well, our political correspondent Ian Watson has been looking at what relaxing the lockdown in England might look like.
This is a message from the government.
But one familiar feature of the lockdown will change this weekend. The government will modify its straightforward and successful "Stay Home" slogan.
To help save lives, stay home.
But ministers are stressing that any move to lift the lockdown will be gradual.
I would really urge caution. The safest thing to do at the moment with this virus and the way it spreads is wherever you can to stay home. Yes, get out and get that daily exercise. And if you can't work from home and can work in safe circumstances, then the guidelines are there for that very purpose. But we've got to continue on the process that we have had. We are doing everything we can to ensure people's safety.
The Prime Minister told the Commons that there could be some changes to the restrictions in England from Monday. And one of the most likely alterations is to expand the range of outdoor activities that are allowed. So instead of simply exercising, you might be able to lounge around in the sunshine. But the key message from the government is this: keep your distance, stay 2 metres apart. Otherwise, your newfound freedom could be short-lived.
Well, not only are there health concerns around relaxing the UK lockdown, there are also economic ones as well. Today, the Bank of England warned of an unprecedented recession that hasn't been seen before. The bank predicts that the UK economy will fall by 30% in the first half of this year due to the impact of this virus. But the bank thinks that the economy will bounce back. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has been speaking to the governor.
I think it is unprecedented in the history of this institution. I would say it's different in two respects. It's a much sharper downturn. So the initial fall is much more pronounced because the economy literally went into shutdown very quickly. The recovery is actually much faster because we believe that, with the right measures in place from the public health side and the fact that it's supported by the very sensible things that the government has done, that economic activity can resume much more quickly.
The Bank of England sees unemployment more than doubling, up 1.5 million to rates not seen since the mid-1990s, and taking 2 years to then fall back. People at home, they see that chart, it looks quite scary.
The chart reflects the reality that we've been in now for, since March. Where I think they should be reassured is that I can tell you that both the government and the Bank of England have put in place a very big package of measures, and we will go on utterly focused on that.
Well, our political correspondent Rob Watson was monitoring that. He joins us live now. Rob, so what's behind the government relaxing the lockdown? Are we talking about health or economic reasons?
I think the first thing to say, Kasia, is this is not going to be some dramatic change in the lockdown. The government has been incredibly careful to signal to lower expectations. I think the phrase that the First Secretary of State, Foreign Secretary, used at the Downing Street press conference was any changes would be modest, small and incremental. I mean, as to what they're doing, what's driving this, in many ways, it's the same that every country faces, Kasia, in the absence of a vaccine or a cure. How do you balance trying to stop your health system being utterly overwhelmed against, as we were just hearing, the prospect of economic collapse? And I would say that the government in the UK is still erring, I think, more on the side of worrying about health, worrying about the threat to the UK's national healthcare system, but of course is also seeing what it can do to somewhat ease restrictions.
And Rob, stay with us because another worrying development I want to look at, which is related to coronavirus. A new study has revealed that men from an Afro-Caribbean background are 4 times more likely to die with COVID-19 in England and Wales than white people. And there are similar disparities with women, as the head of health analysis for the ONS explains.
The black ethnic group is now about 90% or 1.9 times more likely to die from COVID-related issues. Bangladeshi and Pakistani males are about 80% more likely, females about 60% more likely, and Indian females are about 40% more likely, and males about 30% more likely, once we've adjusted for all those factors.
Now, one possible reason for this disparity is the large number of ethnic minorities who work in the health sector. And here's the chair of the Association of Pakistani Physicians and Surgeons in the UK, Dr. Abdul Hafiz.
Obviously, we are quite concerned in terms of the figures which specifically are showing the health staff. Obviously, the BME staff makes about 44% of the NHS total workforce, and 72% of the people who have actually died, the medical staff, are actually from BAME community. This is a startling, discrepancy between the Asians, the black ethnic, as well as other ethnicities compared to white local population.
So let's get Rob back in on this, an extremely worrying finding. It was touched upon actually today at the daily briefing. What is the government doing to counter the BAME vulnerability to COVID? And are we talking about a socio-economic rather than a health issue?
Right, let me do that one briefly. So I think the first thing to note is that the figure is you're 4 times more likely to die if you're black. But if you take in what are known as the socio-economic factors, in other words, if you're, the kind of job you're doing, the kind of housing you live in, if you're poorer, then the number goes down to about half. In other words, you'll be twice as likely to die. All of those other factors being set aside, and the government doesn't know why. And so when you ask, well, what is the government doing? I mean, it's sent the health authorities to try and discover this. I mean, beyond issues of poverty, the kind of job you do, working in the health sector, working in public transport, what on earth is the explanation for a higher risk rate amongst black and ethnic minorities? And at the moment, the government simply does not have an answer.
Rob, as always, thank you so much. Rob Watson there, our political correspondent, joining us live. So you're up to date with the situation in the UK. Now, the toll of coronavirus on the world's biggest economy has been immense. Latest job figures out of the US show another 3.2 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefit this week. So this means that 33 million people, that's 1 in 5 workers in America, have lost their jobs since the lockdown brought the US economy to a standstill 7 weeks ago. It's a massive turn in events. 2 months ago, America was boasting an unemployment rate of only 3.5%, its lowest in 30 years. Economists fear that figure could reach 15% or even higher. The question has turned to this. Top US economist Mohamed El-Erian tweets, how quickly do the unemployed get jobs? How many drop out of the labour force? What happens to hourly earnings? Well, let's touch upon some of that with Catty Kay, who joins us live from Washington. And Catty, the fact that despite these recent reopenings that we're seeing across the United States, the number of people collecting benefits continue to rise. So it feels like people are just simply not returning back to the workforce.
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to get the unemployment figures for the month of April, and the speculation, as you suggest, is that it's going to be up at 15%. That's similar to the Great Depression of the 1920s, Kasham. It's a huge blow to the American economy. And what's happening is, you're right, states are opening around the country. About half of American states are now starting to reopen businesses. But all of the indications so far from states that opened a couple of weeks ago is that consumers aren't going back to businesses. So the governments in those states are saying, we think it's safe for you to start opening, with all of the restrictions, of course, but consumers are saying we don't feel safe. We don't feel safe going to restaurants or hairdressers or nail salons. And so people aren't starting to generate income, and therefore people aren't being employed again. What's interesting is that a poll has come out in the last couple of days suggesting that most American workers who have been laid off do feel that they have a strong chance of being rehired once the country is fully open again. That gets to this idea of, is this a V-shaped recovery? Was there a precipitous drop and then a precipitous climb back up again in the economy? That's what the White House is hoping for. Quite a lot of public health experts and other economists and business leaders that I've been speaking to are a bit more sceptical about that.
Catty, stay right there, because I also want to touch upon another development coming from the United States. New research has linked infections in New York City before social distancing began to outbreaks across America. Now, experts at Yale tracked mutations of the virus, the history of infected people, and models of the outbreak, and they came up with this. New York was the primary source of new infections, taking the virus from the city to the southern states and even as far as the West Coast. And these New York Times graphics show more detail. The infections linked to New York City are those highlighted in red, while the viruses that spread from Washington, for example, are highlighted in yellow. And here are the outbreaks in the southern states. As you can see, every sample taken from Louisiana was related to New York. And here you have the northeastern states most linked to New York. So let's get Catty back. Catty, given the numbers in New York, no huge surprise, but it's a real eye-opener when it comes to the timings of social distancing being brought in.
Yeah, and also about how this virus spread from big cities, right? And we've seen this around the world. So Wuhan in China, Milan in Italy, they became the focus points from which then the rest of the country got infected. We thought initially this was going to be a virus that came into the United States from China via Washington state and then spread around the country. What this New York Times reporting shows us is that actually it came from China originally, of course, but then through Europe, and then European flights that came into New York City during the months of January, February, March. And then those people traveled all around the country from New York City, taking the virus with them. And the implication of this reporting is that by the time the president stopped those flights and people coming from Europe on March the 13th, by then, this report says, it was already too late. The virus was already in New York City and already traveling around the country. I think it's an interesting report also for policymakers to look at as the country starts reopening, because it's a reminder, of course, that this is a country of 50 states and people can move freely from one state to another. They took the virus freely from New York State to other states around the country. If we reopen and some places become a hotspot, then there is the risk, of course, that people can travel from one state across the border into another state quite freely without a passport, with no restrictions, and again take the virus around the country again.
Yes, the implications are huge. And Catty, now just moving away very briefly from coronavirus, the US Justice Department has just announced that it's dropping the case against President Trump's former security advisor, Michael Flynn. Now, Mr. Trump said that he is very happy for him. Catty, remind us about this case.
Yeah, so the case of Michael Flynn was one of the biggest cases surrounding the Mueller investigation into whether the Trump campaign had unlawful contacts with Russia during the 2016 election campaign. And Michael Flynn had been having contacts with the Russian ambassador to the United States and with other Russian officials, and he didn't tell the White House about it, and he also lied to the FBI about it. In 2017, Mr. Flynn actually admitted lying to the FBI. He had been Donald Trump's national security advisor. He was fired as the national security advisor. He was caught up in the Mueller investigation. He admitted in 2017 that he lied to the FBI about his contacts with Russians during the campaign, and pleaded guilty to that. Even so, the Justice Department is saying that they feel that Mr. Flynn didn't really fully understand what the FBI was asking him, and that's why they've decided to drop this case. It seems quite political. General Flynn was a favorite of Donald Trump's. Donald Trump today saying that describing him as a warrior, and saying that he felt that he had been unwrongly charged in the first place. So a big win for the White House and for Donald Trump, and more of the politics of the Mueller investigation, which still rippling through the election process here in the States.
It feels like a different world ago. Catty, as always, thank you so much. Catty Kay there joining us live. Thanks for talking us through it. Do stay with us here on Outside Source. Still to come, we'll be telling you why Pakistan is lifting its lockdown, even though infections there are rising.